The California housing market is teetering on the edge. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how politicians can and why they should just push it right on over the edge. We're going to talk about the three-legged stool, three things that have been propping up California real estate values for years and years and years. We're going to talk about desirability with a special emphasis on the climate here in California, which is incredible, jobs in the economy, and the industries that keep us powered. And then the biggest focus is going to be on low inventory, how we got here, and how we can get ourselves out of this in a way that is sustainable. So the first leg, desirability. California is awesome. I'm born and raised here, lived here my whole life, and I'm not ever planning on leaving because California is awesome. So I hate the beach. I'm one of those rare Southern Californians that don't enjoy going to the beach. But what a cool state where you can go surfing or take your kids to the ocean and then go hop in a car for 2 hours and go to the mountains and see some snow. It's an amazing place to be. Californians, if you've ever seen that SNL skit, we get a little bit of a bad rep, but Californians are pretty amazing people as well. Maybe it's just living where I live, but I find myself surrounded by amazing people more often than not. So like the people, the climate, business, just the community. The only thing that kind of sucks down here is the traffic. But if you lived in California your whole life, you kind of get used to it. But the desirability is getting worse. So let's talk about the climate. Weather is getting worse. In 2025, that was the third hottest year on record. Drought is getting worse. Somehow, I don't know, scientists are able to figure this out, but this is the driest 22-year span in 1,000 years, which sounds obviously terrible. As a result, snowpack is getting worse. Now in April 2026, we only have 15 to 18% of the average snowpack. That's what happens when you don't get rain, you don't get snow. Fires are getting worse. So 15 of the 20 most destructive fires on record have occurred since 2015. That is not a good stat. And then flooding is getting worse, and that is before Super El Nino is coming later this year. I don't really know what that means, but our weather, which is a staple of beautiful California living, is just across the board getting worse. What does this look like for state population? This is a crazy graph. So if you see from like 1900 to 1920, we had pretty low growth. And then from 1920 to 2020 was remarkably consistent growth in the population of the state of California. And if you see here at the very end, some moderation and some downward movement, which doesn't really match with the rest of the data in the graph. So let's zoom in. Since 2020, what the California population has looked like. We are now declining in population as a state. So this starts about 5-6 years ago, right before the pandemic and the subsequent recession. California, for a lot of reasons, has seen net negative migration. You have a lot of folks, my mom included, who have moved out of the state for political reasons. You have other folks who are leaving the state because they're being targeted by federal entities. And then there's just folks who are frustrated with the incredible cost of living here. And I don't blame them. The pricing and the cost of living in California, in most of California, is horrifying and a crisis. So I'll make that point a little bit more later. But we are losing people as of right now. And it's not just residents leaving California. So let's talk about this second leg, which is jobs, the economy, and industry at large. So California is known, and rightfully so, for Hollywood, for tech, and for agriculture. You may eye roll about Hollywood, and you probably should. Hollywood is a funny place. It's a funny industry, but it has been historically incredibly powerful and significant for the entire world. But that isn't really the case anymore. Our tech, something that we used to be really lauded for, and it was a shining beacon for innovation out here in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and now everyone hates big tech, myself included. Agriculture is still going strong, but we're going to get into one of those threats here on this next slide. So for jobs and economy, entertainment is decentralizing. Hollywood no longer holds a monopoly on content creation. You're seeing this happen literally everywhere now. So it's happening all throughout the United States, all throughout the world. Hollywood has lost a lot of its appeal and its power. Tech is dispersing. Many companies have relocated to states like Texas for regulation and taxation. Billionaires are leaving. This was happening before we decided to try to make them all leave with the billionaire wealth tax. but higher taxes and targeted taxes are causing them to move on out. And then agriculture is being targeted. So since California is a blue state, our immigrant communities are being targeted by the federal government more so in our neighboring red states. And then you have our special projects like the California High-Speed Rail. If you are not familiar with this, don't read up about it. It's a sad, frustrating tale. But the original budget was somewhere between $10 and $33 billion. It's supposed to be complete by 2020. The budget is now currently projected to be $126 billion and scheduled to be complete by 2030, which is shocking because they haven't actually started. So the budget is most likely going to be well over $100 billion over. And who knows if and when this will ever actually be completed. So this is one of the marquee modernization projects for the state of California. And it is a horrible disgrace of a project, especially for somebody like me who does fairly large scale construction. This is just, it's unacceptable. The third leg, what this channel is more dedicated towards talking about, is low inventory. So there are systemic problems that have been made worse by builders, investors, and politicians. We're going to touch on each of the three and then camp out both on the investor portion and the politicians portion, because these two directly tie into each other. So for builders, I am a licensed contractor in the state of California. I do residential construction, but also work on a few larger scale industrial projects. Land out here is expensive, like shockingly expensive, especially in Southern California. So if you're a development company, it makes a lot more sense to buy land in the Southeast, which is where a lot of the development is happening, because land in Southern California especially, but then parts of the Bay and just stream throughout California, land is expensive or too expensive. As a result, labor is expensive. Since we Californians have to pay an incredible rate to live here, we charge a lot to do our work. Permits are insanely expensive. You want to get anything done in the state of California, you have to pay a permit for it, most likely multiple permits, and each one is going to be outrageously expensive. And then the regulations are extensive. So for a lot of the builders and specifically developers, they just move on. They're like, you know what, California is kind of interesting, but because of land, labor, permits, and regulations, we're just going to look somewhere else. So the question is, would you rather build in California or literally anywhere else where it's going to be cheaper, faster, and easier? So builders, we own part of the problem, but also a lot of the problem isn't really ours. It's just we move out of state oftentimes for other reasons. Investors. This is the big one that I talk about quite a bit on this channel. So what happens when homes turn into investable assets? Well, California's homeownership rate in 2024 was 10.3 percentage points lower than the US as a whole. So in a typical state throughout the US, about 65.6% of people who live in homes own that home. For California, it's 55.3%. Why? Let's look at it. So we're going to go through the charts available on Redfin. So all these are just wonderful charts where they track investor market share. We're going to look at Anaheim, California. So sometimes these are sort of coterminous with the county. So Anaheim would be sort of a proxy for Orange County. But the investor market share here, 26% of all homes right now are being purchased by investors. What does that look like in other places? Well, in Los Angeles, it's 24%. Oakland, 20%. Riverside, 18%. Sacramento, 20%. San Diego, 25%. San Francisco, 25%. And San Jose has seen a lot of growth in that investor activity since 2022, now up to 21%. What you're looking at is 1 out of 4 or 1 out of every 5 homes that are sold in most of the markets in California are going to investors. Some of these investors are going to fix and flip, and it's going to be a short-term property. A lot of them turn into Airbnbs or long-term rentals. And this is part of the reason why it's really hard to get the stat, but roughly somewhere between 30 to 40% of all single-family residences in the state of California are non-owner occupied. It's an insane stat, and it's one that can be fixed pretty quickly. Here's another 2 sets of data points put together by CBRE. So figure 3, buying premium for the 25 largest markets in the United States. What this is looking at is basically your monthly premium payment as a percentage, let's say mortgage as a percentage of rent. So for Orange County, where I live, I'm in Huntington Beach. Orange County, a typical mortgage is 303% of the typical rent. So if typical rent is $3,000, that means your typical mortgage is like $9,100. I'll say that again. So if your typical rent is about $3,000, your typical mortgage should be about $9,100. Just let that sink in a little bit. Orange County is the most expensive major market in the entire United States, but Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, and Oakland also make this list. A couple other just mind-blowing stats. So here's that first one about the 303% of the typical rent payment. But Orange County renter households that can afford a median-priced home as of Q2 2025 fell to a record low 1%. So in 2025, as of about a year ago today, only 1% of California renters could afford a median-priced home. 1%. This is a crisis. If only 1% of residents can afford to purchase a home, then the rules governing the market are producing the wrong outcome. I don't see how you could see this any other way than something is structurally, systemically, horrifyingly wrong. So new homes are too expensive to build. Having worked on a lot of residential projects, I know this firsthand. Multifamily homes and condos are too difficult to permit. I worked with a guy who would basically buy land and go through the permitting process and sell permitted plans to builders because, I don't know, he made a lot of money doing this. But the whole concept was getting permits is so hard and so expensive that if he could sell permitted plans on owned land, I don't know, he's doing like 80-90% of the work for builders and developers. And the third part is that investors have been allowed to run up prices without obstacle. So, simple fix. I've pitched this multiple times. I'll continue to do so until we start to see some traction. So, how to start deflating the balloon without popping it overnight. Focuses on non-owner occupied single-family residences. I propose a 1% tax at closing, then an additional 1% property tax, with both taxes being adjustable to allow for flexibility in future markets. Putting this practically, so for an $800,000 single-family residence, an investor would have to pay an additional $8,000 at closing and $8,000 per year in property taxes. What would this do to the market? First off, California would have an additional tax source while fixing a problem. Typically, the way that a lot of California policies go into place is we find a really expensive solution to a problem and try to put ourselves into further financial difficulty. I don't know why, but that's just the way that California tends to run. This would actually help us make more money while solving a problem. That's a benefit. But this would also make single-family residences less profitable for investors and would shift owned inventory back to Californians who want to live in these homes. So if buying a single-family residence and holding it long-term is no longer as profitable, you'd see a little bit of a decline in the amount of investors purchasing these homes. You do not want to manufacture a housing crash, but you need to take some air out of the top of the market and providing a proper incentive for people to purchase fewer homes and then to sell a higher percentage of the homes that are currently owned in investor portfolios would do wonders for allowing a more stable market. So fewer investors would mean more available homes. More available homes would equal lower prices. Lower prices would equal a healthier and more stable market. So we looked at one stat. So for typically Los Angeles County, there's around 17 to 20,000 available homes in a given month most of the time. If you look at the amount of Airbnbs that are currently listed in Los Angeles, it's again hard to get this data accurate, but there's about 18,000 Airbnbs in just, I think, city of Los Angeles right now. So it's about a 1-to-1 ratio. So let's say Airbnbs became less profitable because you're charging an additional property tax on each of the non-owner occupied single family residences. What you would see is, let's say maybe 10% of those Airbnbs are like, you know what, we're going to sell this property and return it to the market. You would have a 10% increase in the amount of inventory, which is now available and more attractive to the families in communities who want to actually own those homes and live in them themselves. So you'd see a transfer from investors to homeowners, which is the whole idea of this. It's just a simple way to introduce sort of a penalty or a tax to help level the playing field. This is the three-legged stool. There are two things that are happening that are well outside my scope with the climate and the industries at large. But the low inventory is something that we're starting to see creep up. We're starting to see inventory climb, but our politicians can help get it to where it needs to be to cause a meaningful decline in home values. This is something that they could enact relatively shortly that would be cash flow positive for the state as a whole and bring more balance and lower prices to the market. Let me know what you think. If you have questions, please leave a comment below. If you want to push back, please leave a comment below. If you want to connect further, I read all the comments. So please leave a comment below. My name is Nathan with the California Housing Collective. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.